Hi, and welcome to our first episode of Silly Sapiens. I'm your host, Chaz, and today we're going to be talking about E Pluribus Unum, something you definitely have seen, but may know nothing about. All that when we come back on Silly Sapiens. Welcome back. Like I said, it's our first episode of Silly Sapiens. You may be wondering, why the name Silly Sapiens? Well, I went on this journey where I wanted to kind of learn everything there was to learn about sapiens and how we got to where we are today and all the beliefs we have and the cultures we have and why they are the way they are. When I started studying it and realizing how one person or one sect of people could control so much of what we believe today or the cultures we have today in our society, it became kind of silly to me. Something that we hold so dear to our core of who we are and put others on the outside from was just started by one person or one thing that they decreed a law at that point in time in history, rather it be 1,000 years ago, and today we still practice it. Something else that kind of ties into that of gaining that wider perspective was this video that went viral on Facebook and YouTube and all of those things called The Little Blue Dot. And you see our Earth and they zoom further and further and further and further away from it, where it's just this little speck in our solar system. And then it becomes a tiny little dust speck in our galaxy and then goes further and further. And from that perspective, you're able to see how small and in that regards, insignificant we are to this grand universe. And in that moment, just even for a glimpse, you're able to see how silly everything really is. So today we're going to be talking about E Pluribus Unum, and I hope that that actually is a common theme throughout all of our episodes. E Pluribus Unum stands for out of many, one. And today, talking with me about this is going to be Tarl from podcast called Podcast to the People. He'll tell us all about that right when we come back.
I am an American.
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 I'm an American.
I am an American.
I
I
am
an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am American.
I am America.
I'm an American.
I'm an American.
I'm an American.
I am an American.
am an American.
I'm an American.
Hi, Tarl. Welcome to Silly Sapiens.
Thank you for having me, Chaz.
So you have your own podcast, well, or in the start of your own podcast.
There has not
Podcast.
been your first episode yet, but we are working on it.
Well, maybe by the time this airs, there will be.
It's true.
Podcast to the People. Why Podcast to the People?
Yeah, so it kind of ties in with E Pluribus Unum, so thanks for having me on this episode.
It's like we planned it or something.
Right? It's like we knew this was happening. So the aspect or the thought process behind the podcast is, well, one, it's kind of like a commentary on other podcasts. It'll be discussion groups about our favorite podcasts and the social issues that come up in different podcasts. But it's also kind of a combination of other people's ideas. I want it to be really listener invested. I want people to feel like they can send in questions or comments and really be involved. And if they have ideas for different segments, or if you have a piece of audio or a story that you want to tell through audio, but you don't really have an outlet to do it on, Podcast for the People is for you. And so, yeah, it'll be kind of out of many ideas, we'll have one podcast for the people.
Cool. Well, you know, it's funny that you said that it's kind of E Pluribus Unum playing into podcasting, because you and I kind of were talking about this before the show of how it's interesting that we're kind of going back in time where people are gathering around their modern day radios and listening to big stories, whether it's something like Serial with Adnan or this recent one, S-Town.
S-Town, so good. If you haven't listened to it, you should. It's one of those good gateway podcasts.
Right, well, those are the two podcasts I've listened to thus far, and that's it.
Well, it wasn't a gateway.
No, it just doesn't work in my everyday life. I'm trying, but I do find interesting that we are now kind of coming back where we're gathering around, because I think looking back in Americans' history, that was something that brought the nation together. Everybody gathering around their radios, listening to, the space age back then, or the Cold War, insert everything else that happened in this vast amount of history. But and now we're kind of redoing it again, which is fascinating.
I like it though, because like podcasts really kind of kicked it into gear.
Yeah.
I mean, when you had the radio, you had maybe 3 stations, but now there's podcasts for anything, and you really get to narrow down your interests, and then you find other people that happen to have those same interests, and you can build a real community around it. I think that's my favorite thing about podcasts, is that even though you don't see anyone really, even the host or anything, you can really build this community around thoughts and ideas that are coming through your podcast.
Well, hopefully you help me turn this into a podcast as well.
We'll see. It's a
We'll
lot
see.
easier. I'm so confused by all this. Where do I look and turn and
Well,
adjust?
just go with
It's like
it.
me and the mic.
So E Pluribus Unum, out of many, one. What does that mean to you? What's your interpretation of that?
So to me, I take like the grander scope
Mhm.
of the idea, and the fact that it is kind of like that golden rule that runs throughout history, and I know we'll get into this.
What is that golden rule?
Do unto others as you would have to unto. Really
Mhm.
seeing yourself in other people, or at least the ability or the attempt to
Mhm.
see yourself in other people, which ultimately leads to, in non-psychopaths, I shouldn't use that term, but
Too late, you already did.
true. Edit it out. Compassion is
Right.
ultimately what E Pluribus Unum means to me. And I think it was a really great motto for America. I think it encapsulates the spirit of America much more so than maybe In God We Trust, which I know we'll get into as well. But yeah, to me, I like that broader scope of it.
Yeah.
This idea of compassion for all. Out of many people, out of many nations, however you want to grasp it, large or small, whether it's your family units, you need all of each other, it takes a village,
Right.
however you may look at it.
Right.
It's ultimately this idea of compassion and treating each other as you want to be treated.
I would say that my interpretation of it is pretty much around that same idea. And you mentioned that you liked it better than the motto of "In God We Trust." I'm kind of on that same page, because I think that out of many, one can encapsulate a lot more people than "In God We Trust." In God We Trust, you are excluding a lot of Americans who are still American and have their own freedom to religion, and that church and state separation. First,
Go ahead.
it's okay. Versus one out of many. It could go back to what we're going to talk about here in a second, of its actual history in America and why they used it. We have many states, but we have one central government that brings us together, and together we are stronger all to the rest of the world. So I love that you can interpret it that way. I think you could go back to the Big Bang. Out of this one bang, you get our entire known universe. If you want to go, to one source, God, whatever you want to put as that ultimatum from that breath of life, or whatever. You go back, you want to go to the tree of life, from this one little life form that came to earth that sparked all of it. It's really, its interpretation is huge, and I think it could unite more people under that umbrella. But let's get into a little bit of the history of it and learn some more. So there's some other teach you something. Well, I know you've done some research, so we'll see how well I do. So there's a few different interpretations of it, or translations. We have the one out of many, as I've said multiple times, and then we have one from many. So not too terribly different, but it was Latin originally, and we brought it into English. And as with most translations, things change a bit.
There's interpretation along the way.
Right. So it first came to America, or I should say, suggested for it to be in our seal, or our de facto motto, in 1776 by a guy. Now, you helped me with his name earlier, Pierre
Eugene de Simentier.
Yeah, exactly. I don't claim to know French. I don't claim to speak
I had
French.
to Google it.
God bless Google.
So, oh, thank God we live in this time.
So Pierre was the first to actually suggest this motto. Now, where he got and all of that, when I first started looking into E Pluribus Unum, I thought, wow, it's going to have this huge history that's going to go way far back, which it does go back, but it's not very clear. It's not really too clear how it made its way all the way to here. The furthest back I can go to is around Pythagoras' time, which most of us just know Pythagoras for his theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Or if you're like me, you're like, yeah, moving on.
You learned that at some point
You learned
in
it
school.
in school or college, and you're
Forgot it
like,
right
when am
away.
I going to use that? And then it comes back and haunts you.
Yeah.
So,
he's a fascinating character. Don't know if I
right,
agree with
right.
everything he said, but
Right, because Pythagoras, we know him for what I just said and his geometry and all of this stuff, but he definitely viewed the world very mathematically, and because of that, it caused him to have some extreme views on sexual relations, and he ends up playing a huge role in Judaism and then, therefore, Christianity, which most people don't know about. Again, the
and
whole thing.
shaping a lot of, and I'm sure you'll have discussions about this as well as on podcasts with the people, but the history of homosexuality.
Right.
He had a big plan because he was him and his followers were very dualistic. You were body and soul. You were, everything was two separate things. There was very little middle ground for him and his people, which,
Right.
like you said, had a big play on Judaism and
Right.
later Christianity and fascinating
Right.
character. Well, let's not get too off.
Right. Definitely will be in a later episode. So like I said, he didn't really write anything down, but he did start schools and things. So orally, a lot of his stuff was passed down. Now, where we have a record of this is from Cicero. Cicero was about to be executed, and at the time he was writing...
Wait, when is this?
Cicero. So let's back. Pythagoras was 570 BC is when he was born, and he died around 490. Let me check myself. 495 BCE. All right. So now,
Okay, so just to clarify, 'cause some people don't know this, and I know you like to use BCE and CE versus BC and AD. So BCE stands for before Common Era,
correct.
and CE, which is the new AD, is Common Era.
Right.
So
Right.
just want to clear that up for people.
Yes.
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 Not everybody goes by this.
Right, and if you are
newfangled,
using AD and all that, we have an idea of when Jesus died. We don't really know. We think it's around 33.
Yeah, which never made
AD,
sense
but-
to me to begin with.
Right.
Because 1 AD is supposed to be after his death.
Right.
That's also when he was born.
Right, and we don't know really that either. Definitely another episode. We don't have time for that. But okay, so now fast forward to Cicero. Cicero is 44 BCE, so we're going up a good 300, roughly 400 years. And Cicero is trying to write what we would now call like a book to his son of the way that he views a man should live. And he adds this portion to it. When each person loves the other as much as himself, it makes one out of many. And he contributed that to Pythagoras. So what's interesting about Pythagoras is around Pythagoras' time, there was a contemporary, I'm going to probably mess up his name, I apologize, Heraclitus? Heraclitus, one of those two. Now
You guys know him.
Yeah, he's your BFF. That's 535 BCE to 475 BCE. Now, from everything I read about them, I'm going to say his name again, I'm probably butchered it, but Heraclitus did not have the nicest of things to say about Pythagoras. So, but he definitely knew about him, he knew about his work, definitely much better than we do today. So you would assume that he would have known about that quote that I just read from Pythagoras. Now, Heraclitus had one of his own that he put in his 10th fragment, and he was a philosopher of his time, and this is what he said: the one is made up of all things, and all things issue from the one. Sounds something like you'd hear Yoda say or something like that.
Yeah, that's some funky talk.
Right. Now you fast forward through history, and there's really nothing that we can find about it until like the early 1700s. This gentleman's magazine in London comes out, and it actually has E Pluribus Unum written on every issue. And then that comes over to America, and then bam, Pierre says, hey, let's do E Pluribus Unum. And it's believed that he said that because at that time, they had these 13 colonies, and it was very apparent that they had to stick together to beat the British Empire. Virginia wasn't going to do it on its own. New York wasn't going to do it on its own. They had to come together. And not only were they 13 different colonies, but they were many different people at this time. I mean, you had the Quakers, and you had the Pilgrims, and insert
We
more
kind of take this idea of a melting pot for granted our day of age, but when America was doing it, this was a radical idea to have so many different nationalities trying to come together as one
Right.
solid nation.
right,
It's, boggling their minds.
right.
So yeah, this phrase I think was a good way of getting the idea out to people, even
Right.
if it was from a dead language. Good job, guys.
So everybody was behind it, and what's is interesting, I forgot my dollar, but if you find a dollar, take it out, look on the back, and we'll try to get one up and post editing. But um, excuse me, there is a back of the seal that I had no idea existed. We see the one with the eagle. Again, hopefully there's a picture on screen right now in post-editing, but you see the eagle and the ribbon in his mouth says E Pluribus Unum. Well, on the back of that, there's actually a whole nother seal, and on your dollar, you see it perfectly, and you're going to be familiar with it whenever I say it's the half, or the unfinished pyramid with the all-seeing eye on top. And then there's two, there's two other Latin sayings on that, which is Annuit Coptus, he favors our undertaking, and Novus Ordo Seclorum.
Novus Ordo Seclorum.
Thank you. New Order of the Ages, which sounds very Freemasonish,
Yeah, that sounds
probably
pretty
because
deep.
it was, but it really was a New Order of the Ages because, just like you were touching on, they were trying something that really hadn't been done before
Radically
in
different,
that
yeah.
common era. So that's kind of, it's like fast forward version of how it got its start, and it got minted on coins pretty much shortly after that in New Jersey, of all places.
It's
And
kind of right from the get-go, right? You were talking 1776.
Right.
From the get-go.
that we started putting on our coins,
Mhm.
right, right. 1786 is when it was first struck in the state of New Jersey, and ever since it has been on there, and it's still on the current president coins that are minted to this day. So you're probably wondering, well, if that was the start of our motto, when did "In God We Trust" become our motto? Fair question. That was actually in 1956. Now, it's not to say that in 1956 somebody just pulled it out of thin air and said, hey, let's use this. It was kind of also another de facto motto since about the Civil War. And
Post-Civil War, yeah.
right, right. So, and this was suggested by a reverend by the name of M.R. Watkinson.
Okay, so from my research, I found that there were a couple different reverends
Mhm.
that were, and it was this kind of movement of evangelicals.
Mhm.
It has a different connotation now than maybe it did back then, but it was this big push of let's get God into this somehow, even though it was supposed to be a freedom of religion state. But yeah, there were people like this Reverend Watkinson.
Right, right. And he suggested it because during the Civil War, he thought that there was a lot of heathenism going on, and
Yeah, my favorite quote from him was, it's not a quote, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said something along the lines of, in his, speech to try to get "In God We Trust" into it, he was like, imagine a time in the future when our nation has gone to crumble, people are going to rightfully look back and think that we were a heathen nation because we didn't write God on everything.
which what is so interesting about that is, so at that time it does start getting put on some coins, and it kind of gets some steam, but it really doesn't become official until 1956 when Congress approves it, and then after Congress approves it, Eisenhower signs off on it. And leading up to that, we have the Cold War, and it was looked at as the Soviets were godless. They were a secular nation. They didn't have God. They had all these loose morals, and we are on the other side of the world, and we have God on our side. We have our morals. We're a Christian nation, yada yada yada. And so they wanted to have that disposition of the two. So it's interesting that he had his quote then. You fast forward to 1956, and it's kind of the same argument that happens all over again.
And we've had similar art up to this day, trying to get prayer into school, and they're all, I say that's awful, but the religious section of our nation is always trying to keep God in the forefront and a part of our nation.
Right. It's that church and state is real tricky for some people. It's real hard for them to. But how that actually plays into this is E Pluribus Unum, out of many one, is at the core of what Jesus taught. It's at the core of what the Buddha taught. It's at the core of what uh, uh, losing my train of thought, but in Hinduism, it's the core of
Muhammad.
thought is Muhammad. That's exactly who I was looking for, Muhammad. I mean, uh, it's quite interesting. We just saw it when we went back to Pythagoras, and you fast forward, everybody, even though at these point in times in history, whether it was the Roman Empire or Greece or Prussia, uh, there were lots of fighting breaking out, lots of other cultures getting absorbed into this one big one, but it wasn't peaceful. It wasn't this utopian paradise that all of these people said, no, it's possible. We can get there. But we've always been on the other side, yet these people have seen it. They say that we have the capability to get there. And so uh, what's interesting, what's my favorite part about New York is I feel like it's the epitome of E Pluribus Unum. You really do get to have that full picture of out of many one.
800 different languages, over 800 different languages
Right.
spoken in New York.
Right. And we were talking about this earlier, is a good percentage of New Yorkers aren't too happy with the person that we came from New York and became the president, you know. But
Down
the
Trump out.
the
Yeah.
truth of the matter is, out of many one, it's everybody. Whether you like that person or not, that's where it becomes difficult. That's why it's a practice. That's why it's compassion. It's because it's not easy to say, okay, yes, I'm on the same level as this murderer. I'm on the same level as this. And that's what all of these people that have had the same idea have pushed. There was a big Jewish leader, and he played a very important role in Judaism. His name was Hillel, and he was around, he was born 110 BCE and died in 10 CE. And his quote was, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. The rest is the explanation of this. Go and study." And the reason why he said that, because he had a pupil come to him and said, okay, I'll convert to Judaism if you can tell me the entire Torah on one foot. So that's the quote he gives them. And it is interesting because this is in Israel, so Jesus could have very well been familiar with this, and that could have inspired his famous quote that we get that became the golden rule. So it's not something that's easy. It's not something that comes natural, but
Arguably, it's one of the most difficult things for any humans to do.
Right.
It sounds so simple. Treat your neighbor like your neighbor.
Right.
And when you look your neighbor in the face, you're like, oh yeah, I treat you like I would treat me.
Right.
But you have to take your neighbor and now think of this Syrian refugee halfway across the world that you're never going to meet. They're also your neighbor.
Right. It's easy when your neighbor it seems like yourself. You can recognize yourself in your neighbor, and the easiest way to do that is you guys share the same beliefs, you share the same culture, you know, all of these social walls we build up that go way back in our history to where we natural resources we had to protect our, you know, we had this is our territory, etc. We had these tribe mentalities, and you're that tribe, you stay out. Now the whole world is having to live together. And what's so interesting, not only do I think the United States has to try to get back to living with this, but as the whole world, as these huge issues like climate change or overfishing in our oceans or all the plastic in our oceans, issues that we have to face as one people of the earth, from one earth, all of us together have to tackle this. And, you know, a lot of times when you turn on the news, you don't see it, but it is there, and there are many people fighting, and some days I'm completely depressed and not very optimistic. But when I look back through history and you see how many people in times that weren't great said this, and they believed it, and they believed that it was possible, it does give me some hope.
I think that's a good way of putting it, that no matter what, I mean, as far back as Pythagoras, probably even further than that, we've had this recurring idea. The greatest thinkers of the world, the people that are really trying to cure unhappiness and suffering, they all come back to the same issue, whether it's Jesus with the golden rule, or Hillel, like you said, or Pierre, who's strictly thinking for political reasons. They all come back to the same idea of compassion, and that we're all kind of one. We all have to work together, whether you like it or not. So yeah, when you think of it that way, it's kind of uplifting that no matter what's thrown at us, we still keep popping up this idea of nothing's going to get better if we're not all working together and seeing compassion in each other.
Absolutely. And that's why I wanted to have the first episode of Silly Sapiens as that, because as we go on, we are going to talk way more about Jesus, way more about Muhammad, way more about Buddha. And it's not going to all just be on religious things as well. There's going to be other historical events that have shaped the way of that we are today, and we're definitely going to talk about that as well.
What's made us silly sapiens?
Silly Sapiens. When all of those are going to come out, you're just going to have to follow us on Twitter. I'm sure that it's popped up around here throughout the show of our different Twitter handles, and you can definitely keep following Twitter to find out when Podcast to the People comes out.
Yeah, get invested, people. Let us know what you think. It's just like E Pluribus Unum. Can't do this without you. So.
That's right. We got one more ad for you guys. Our PSA, not an ad, sorry about that. But they did another fantastic job about showing how we are one people. Well, that's our first show of Silly Sapiens. I'd like to thank you for watching. I'd like to thank my guest, Tarl, from Podcast of the People, for joining us today. Don't forget to tweet us at Silly Sapiens. And please let me know what your interpretation of E Pluribus Unum is. Well, until I see you next time.